Thank you for joining me tonight for a new creepy tale. This is Nightmare Theatre and I am Arthur Pembroke. I've got a hot cup of coffee tonight and I have the fireplace on high to combat this biting cold. Tonight is an original tale based on a lost episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. There is something wrong with Squidward. I remember the first time I saw the footage, though I still wish I hadn't. It wasn't a normal episode. Nothing like what I was used to from the bright, colourful world of SpongeBob SquarePants. It was something much darker, more unsettling, something that wormed its way into my mind and stayed there, festering. It started when I got a job interning at Nickelodeon as part of their animation team. It was a dream job at first. I got to see some of my favourite characters in various stages of production, and I was excited to contribute, even in small ways, to the show. One day, we were tasked with reviewing an unfinished episode that had been labelled Squidward's Suicide. It sounded off, but stranger things happen in creative development, and I didn't think much of it. The episode started normally enough, SpongeBob and Patrick playing outside, annoying Squidward while he tried to practice his clarinet in his house. His irritated grumbling was typical, and nothing seemed out of place. But then something shifted. Squidward's clarinet playing became harsher, more dissonant, and his face contorted with frustration. The usual bright colours of Bikini Bottom grew muted, the background art losing its whimsical charm and becoming stark, almost eerie. As Squidward continued to play, the camera zoomed in on his face, his eyes bloodshot and twitching with strain. The music grew louder, more discordant, as if someone was physically shaking the notes out of the instrument. Then the screen cut to black for a second. Just a flash, but long enough for me to catch a glimpse of something that didn't belong in a kid's show. It was a distorted image of a dead fish, mutilated beyond recognition, the eyes staring blankly into the void. When the episode resumed, Squidward was sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark. His house was empty, hollow, as if no one had lived there for a long time. The silence was deafening. SpongeBob and Patrick were nowhere to be seen. It was just Squidward, staring at the floor, his hands shaking slightly. The background noise was gone, replaced by a low, barely perceptible hum. Then Squidward began to speak. "I can't take it anymore," he muttered, his voice gravelly and broken. "Every day it's the same. Every day they laugh, they mock me." His face twisted into an expression of hatred, something I had never seen in the character before. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and there was something wrong about his pupils. They looked too real, too human, as if they were photographs pasted onto the animation cells. "I'll make them stop," Squidward whispered, the words sending a chill down my spine. "I'll make all of them stop!" The screen flashed again, showing brief, unsettling images of dead sea creatures. The images were graphic, too graphic for a kid's show, and I began to feel sick. I glanced at my co-workers, wondering if anyone else was seeing this, but they were all staring at the screen, pale-faced, as if transfixed by the horror unfolding in front of us. The scene transitioned to Squidward outside, standing in the middle of Bikini Bottom. The streets were empty, and the once vibrant town was now cold and desolate. The sky above was an unnatural shade of grey, and a thick fog rolled in from the distance. Squidward held something in his hand, a knife, though it wasn't the comically oversized prop knives used in cartoons. This one looked sharp, real, its edge glinting ominously in the dim light. The camera zoomed in on Squidward's face again, his eyes now completely bloodshot. Tears streaming down his face as he smiled, his mouth stretching too wide, his teeth sharp and grotesque. The next few moments were a blur of blood and screams. The next part of the episode I wish I could forget, but it's etched into my memory with sickening clarity. The show cut to SpongeBob's house. SpongeBob and Patrick are sitting on the couch watching their usual nonsense on TV. They were laughing, carefree, completely unaware that Squidward was lurking just outside SpongeBob's pineapple house. The air in the scene felt heavy, oppressive, as though the characters could sense something was wrong. But they didn't react. The colours on the screen were dimmed, as though the life had been sucked out of Bikini Bottom itself, leaving only a hollow grey shell of the world I had grown up watching. The contrast between their oblivious laughter and the tension in the scene was unbearable. The camera panned slowly, almost agonizingly, as Squidward moved closer to the window. He wasn't the Squidward I was used to, a character always annoyed but ultimately harmless. This Squidward looked different. His eyes bulged unnaturally from his face, bloodshot and red, the whites stained as if he hadn't slept in days. His smile was grotesque, wide, stretching far beyond what his face should have allowed, teeth too sharp, too long. His pupils were tiny pinpricks of madness, darting around as though he were watching the world with a twisted sense of glee. The knife in his hand glinted in the faint light filtering through the window. Unlike the bright, colourful props typically used in the show, this knife was real. Shiny, metallic and menacing. There was something so unsettling about seeing such a realistic weapon in an otherwise cartoonish setting. Suddenly, without warning, the front door to SpongeBob's house creaked open. The sound of it was wrong. Too loud, too slow. The laughter stopped. SpongeBob turned to the door, his wide, innocent eyes blinking in confusion. "Squidward? Is that you?" SpongeBob's voice was cheery, unaware of what was about to happen. Squidward didn't respond. He stepped inside, the shadows casting over him in a way that made him look larger, more monstrous. SpongeBob and Patrick exchanged puzzled looks, but they didn't move, didn't react. It was as if they couldn't sense the danger that loomed over them. The atmosphere in the room felt thick with tension, the air itself practically buzzing with something dark and sinister. Then, without any build-up, Squidward lunged. The movement was so sudden, so violent, it felt as though the entire episode shifted into another genre entirely. Squidward's face contorted with hatred and madness as he brought the knife down into SpongeBob's chest. There was no cartoony splatter of jellyfish jelly or bubbles. No, the liquid that sprayed from SpongeBob was a deep, unsettling crimson. It was blood. Real, thick, and far too detailed for an animated show meant for children. SpongeBob gasped, his eyes widening in shock, a look of betrayal flashing across his face as he realized what was happening. He tried to speak, to ask why, but only choked sounds escaped his mouth. His once yellow body began to turn a sickly shade of brown, sagging and deflating as Squidward withdrew the knife, only to plunge it in again, and again, and again. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The animation was wrong, too realistic, too brutal. SpongeBob's body jerked and spasmed with each stab, his expression frozen in horror. It was as if I was watching someone truly being murdered in front of me, not a beloved cartoon character. Patrick sat frozen on the couch, his mouth open in silent terror. He finally snapped out of his stupor and tried to run, but Squidward was too fast. Patrick barely made it to the door before Squidward caught up to him. The knife sliced across Patrick's back with a wet, sickening sound. Patrick let out a horrible scream, the kind of scream that doesn't belong in a children's show, raw, desperate, filled with the primal fear of someone who knows they're about to die. Squidward didn't stop. He grabbed Patrick by the arm, yanking him backward with a strength that seemed unnatural, almost demonic. Patrick's massive form was no match for Squidward's crazed determination. In one swift motion, Squidward plunged the knife deep into Patrick's side, twisting it with a sickening crunch. Patrick's screams faded into gurgles as blood pooled from his mouth, his wide, dumb eyes filled with agony as his life slipped away. I wanted to look away. I tried to tear my eyes from the screen, but I couldn't. It was like I was trapped in that room with them, forced to watch this horrific scene unfold. There was no music, No sound effects, just the wet, brutal sounds of Squidward's knife, tearing through flesh, and the laboured breaths of SpongeBob and Patrick as their lives drained from them. When it was over, Squidward stood over their lifeless bodies, panting heavily, his chest heaving as though he had just completed some great task. The camera zoomed in on his face, showing his bloodshot eyes, his twisted smile, and the blood splattered across his face. For a moment it looked like he was satisfied, like he had finally found some kind of peace in the carnage. The episode ended with Squidward sitting in his house again, covered in blood, the knife still in his hand. His once stoic and tired face was now twisted in manic satisfaction, his wide eyes staring straight into the camera. For a moment it felt as though he was looking at me through the screen, as if he knew I was watching. Then the final words appeared on the screen in a scrawled, jagged font. Do you feel it now? The screen cut to black. For a long time none of us spoke. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, the kind that clings to your skin. I felt a deep, gnawing sense of dread. This wasn't just an unfinished episode, it was something far darker, something that shouldn't have existed. I later asked some of the senior staff about the episode, but no one seemed to know where it came from. They brushed it off as a sick joke, a prank pulled by a disturbed animator, but I wasn't so sure. Something about the way Squidward looked, the way he moved, it was too real, too deliberate. I left that internship shortly after, unable to shake the feeling that episode gave me. Even now, years later, I still see his face in my nightmares, his twisted smile, those lifeless eyes staring back at me. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I still hear the faint sound of that clarinet playing somewhere in the distance. It's always just out of reach, barely audible, but it's there. That is the end of tonight's story. Thank you all again for joining me. Please leave your comments down below, like and subscribe if you can. It would mean a great deal to me. A new video should be showing up on your screen right about now, and I'll see you all again tomorrow night.